It's the state of the dungeon. It's a video that Rob does about his games. Yeah! Hello friends, I am Rob, and this is my State of the Dungeon address. This is for the game that took place on the 9th of September 2021. The game was Mighty Protectors, and all players were present. The group had a mixed encounter with King Arthur and his knights in England. Superheroes versus knights of old come back into the real world, seemingly, and they were licking their wounds. They were summoned then to go to Sweden, where apparently Ragnarok was about to happen. Several gifted with powers beyond the spectrum that anybody had really been aware of were fighting what seemed like an endless horde of ice giants that were coming out of a portal. The gifted were lined up in front of it, just taking on the giants as they came out, although a couple were escaping. The Swedish military had surrounded the event and were picking off the ice creatures that were trying to escape. The gifted appeared to be very much admirable representations of the various Aesir, the Norse gods, with somebody who was undoubtedly Thor, just huge, red-haired, big beard, massively built. One who appeared to be Odin, muscular, but with a cloak and a spear, and he was apparently doing rune magic to help his allies. And the piles of the dead ice giants and beasts were piling up. So the group arrived in Sweden. They were driven to the fire base outside of the conflict zone. This travel between was punctuated by the fact they were watching as the Swedish government were evacuating people. The closer that they got, there were towns that were practically empty. It looked like they had been concentrating on the ones farthest or closest to the epicenter of the fight, moving on. And as they approached, they also saw a huge stationary disk of storms hanging overhead. Just lightning coming down and massive blasts of wind and constant rain and sleet. It was pretty impressive, all things considered. So they got into the storm in their special vehicle that they were brought into that could contain them all. And they were driven to the base, and pretty much right away were brought before the presence of Veronica Murphy, their boss. And Veronica greeted them, found out what they knew, got a situation report, and it was pretty clear that she's focused on this particular fight. As things currently stand, they only have a few relatively low-power gifted who were in the area. Their healer, for instance, is somebody who can inspire regeneration in others, but it's not very powerful. It's pretty slow and arduous. So that is that's pretty much the extent of what pull she's got, is the gifted that are under her sway at the moment. And at the moment, that means the group. Now, the Swedish army is pretty impressive. They got tanks, they've got planes. Planes are completely useless here. The storm is just too massive. The tanks are surrounding the storm, and again, blasting anything that gets through, and with their high-tech weaponry, they have been able at least to contain the few creatures that have escaped from the gifted, pummeling them to destruction with big cannon shells and the like. So, as it stood, they had contained it, but they weren't anywhere close to stopping it. The group, when they ran into Veronica, they basically were tasked. Find out what's going on, see if you can stop that portal, because we would really like to talk to those gifted and see what they know about what's going on, because these circumstances are popping up all over all of a sudden. So, at first, the biggest barrier to entry was that Rook and Muscles were badly injured. Let's just say the fight against the Knights of King Arthur didn't go very well for some. Pretty heinously for some, as a matter of fact. So, while Bulwark had avoided damage, and Cyghost and Sentinel were okay, Muscles was particularly badly hurt, and Rook was pretty badly hurt. So they got the attention of Ellie, who is the local healer with that regeneration ability. Unfortunately, that meant 1 hit point per hour of regeneration. Very slow, but better than nothing, because they had already had medical attention. There was really nothing else short of near magical gadgets. Now, of course, Bulwark had some healing gadgets which he employed, but then it became time to retool. They didn't have a shop that he could just recharge them, and he wanted to repurpose his arsenal so that he had a more powerful healing stroke. He also helped Muscles to get in touch with his inventive side, and he created a healing a bracelet that basically would put pain-killing drugs into his system as he needed it. So it worked out fairly well for the most part. They now are better equipped and armed, and after the course of an 8-hour rest period, give or take a little bit of extra time for the other things they wanted to do, they were close to ready to go and check what was going on. Well, Bulwark decided he wanted to get a first eye perspective. So he took a video camera. This was one with an actual film in it, because electronics are getting notoriously unreliable, especially recording devices and communication devices near these epicenters. And this was no different. There was wideband static throughout. Rook wasn't enjoying this particular bit, although they had a really strong modem or router that was punching through decent Wi-Fi where he was, so he was enjoying that. But for the most part, yeah, the closer you get to the centers of these things, it just throws everything into just chaos. So he decided he would fly through the storm to get a look at what was going on. And Zygos wanted to go as well. So the two of them took off. Now, they're in powered armor, so the storm wasn't really that much of a danger unless they got hit by lightning. They didn't. They avoided getting hit by lightning with some saving throws. But then the first of the ice beasts came through. It was a nearly translucent wolf. About 30 feet long from nose to tip of tail. Moving along, made of ice. The one thing they could tell is that its eyes were glowing blood red, and though it was pretty much translucent, you could still see the red heart inside of it. They wanted to try to avoid it, and by flying they probably should have, but the wolf saw them, raised its head and howled, and a blast of cold flew out and hit both of them. Now, for the most part, Bulwark took a little cold damage and spiraled out of the way. He is built for that kind of punishment. Not only did Zygos not dodge it, she's vulnerable to cold. This is the first attack she's been hit with cold, so she finally realized it hurts her more than anybody else, and while everybody else has done a pretty good job of getting rid of all of their weaknesses that they started out with, she never knew about that one, so she had no reason to get rid of it. I don't know how she's going to. It'll be interesting to see what creative way she has to try to get over her vulnerability to cold, but we'll see. And she got hurt so badly with frostbite that she had to turn around and fly back. She took some significant damage. Bulwark continued on, however, through the storm, and although it battered them, it was very taxing to fly in the weather. The wind shears were brutal. They were told that closer to the ground the wind wasn't as bad, and that seemed to be the case because it was rough on Bulwark flying the whole way. He was slower and it cost him more power. But eventually, dodging another ice beast encounter, he eventually got within range of the battle, and he could see what was going on. The 11 other of these Aesir were standing around Thor, and Thor was just reaching out and calling down lightning, smashing these giants one after the other after the other. They could see a silver blur that was flying through the giants, seemingly like a silver hammer. And the giants just kept getting felled by these blasts, and sometimes they would survive, and some of the bigger, more aggressive ones would come charging towards to try to hit Thor, and that's when the other Aesir would attack and try to defend him. It was clear that all of them had taken some damage. Even Thor himself had a large red mark across his face. Many of the other ones were... It's clear that they had been wounded. They'd also been some magical healing that had gone on because... Or they healed really quickly because they were none of them incapacitated by any serious injury, despite the fact that these giants were at least 50 feet tall, and some of them going up to 100 to 150 feet tall for the humanoid giants. And the beasts themselves were all at least 30 feet long. Yes, that wolf was the smallest of the breed of beasts that were coming out of this thing. Well, he got about a good 10 minutes worth of footage before a really big giant came out and took a shot at him. And, well, he got hit. He rolled with it and did manage to save his camera from getting smashed. And that was the point where he decided, probably done everything I needed to do here, and took off. So he had an exciting flight back, but for the most part it went fairly uneventfully. And he got back to the base, where he was able to appreciate that the base has a shield over it. Some sort of silver stakes are in the ground in a perimeter around the camp, and that they seem to make some sort of a barrier that stops the worst of the wind effects. So he gets back and gives them the footage, so they all get to see what's going on. And it is pretty awe-inspiring. These giants are immense. Although Muscles insists he wants to punch one. And this looks like a pretty indomitable fight. They never could survive this mass of these things, but these gifted are using powers again and again and again, seemingly without limit. Although, to be fair, they were told that they had been fighting for several days, and all of them looked a bit on the tired side. Like they could use a break. So the group decides, alright, we're going to go. And they decided to go on ATVs, special reinforced ATVs that were protected from the variety of different weather effects. And they would enable them to travel overland comfortably and avoid the worst of the wind, and hopefully mobile enough to avoid the lightning. So the group got on these vehicles and took off. I believe Bulwark used one of his healing gadgets on Cygos to get her so that she wasn't so badly hurt. And they took off. They went through the cold and eventually the bad luck of running into one of the giants. And a pretty big one too, over 100 feet tall. And the thing saw them. They apparently are fairly perceptive. The fact that this big one strayed away from the rest of the Asir was pretty noticeable. Maybe some cracks are showing through in their armor. But he was missing an arm, so he was, feeling some of the effects of battle. But still, he had a spear and looked like he was about ready to get in a good fight. Well, the group was ready to give him a good fight. Muscles basically chucked himself up at the creature, pummeled it. Cygos fired off a blast, but her dice were very cold. Sentinel started trying to fell him by blasting away and trying to rock him, but dice weren't always with him. Although he did drive him to his knees with blasts to the back of his knees, so he can use those powers to affect even large things. And it also turns out that the thing has a weakness of being brittle. Force effects can actually do damage. Blunt force is very effective. And since repulsor blasts project force, turns out that his repulsor blast that normally just induce knockback can't knock back something that big, so it just basically feels like he's sledgehammering it. And he was doing damage, carving chunks out of it. Now, Muscles remembered that he had an axe, and he even got it fixed by a gifted who was in the firebase. So he started hacking at this creature's head, and again, he was able to do some significant damage. But the real threat appeared to be Rook, who had his powered armor, which was working. He had his massive seismic hammer, which was working, and he decided he was going to give this thing a thump. Now, there's something in the psyche of these frost giants. If they see a human figure with a huge hammer, they want to kill it because of Thor. So he drew its ire, and he got skewered with that spear of his. to the tune where if he hadn't had a lot of toughness, he might have been put in serious harm. But he does. So, for being quite healthy and having the superhuman levels of endurance, he took the shot through his midsection, but he's still up and fighting. He didn't like it, but he took a hard blow. About this time, some of the group, I think, is starting to wonder about whether or not those levels in experience might be nice for the defensive bonuses, if nothing else. But this thing was able to hit quite readily until I started rolling really badly, 18s and 19s. But the group teamed up together and really did a good job of pummeling the thing down. Eventually, Ghost would score with a power blast. Bulwark just decided they have this. I'm just going to keep going. I don't need to get in on this fight. And he almost got smushed when Sentinel used his repulsor blast to knock the thing down. As it landed, massive, massive blow. And they finally administered the coup de grace, and it shattered. It was a good team effort, good team fight. Some damage had been taken, but for the most part, the group was shown that they can take on these giants one at a time and be effective against them. So I think that was good for the group, for the most part. And they followed Bulwark and continued heading on, eventually getting to where the fight was going on. So they got to the perimeter of these gifted, and they watched Thor just... And they were there feeling the thunder waves coming off, the concussive force of the lightning slamming down into these giants. It was a sight to behold. Mythology played out in front of their very eyes. And all told, they were able to... Oh, I did forget one thing. Against that giant that had escaped, there was one of the Aesir that had been chasing it down, calling himself the Hunter. He was able to fly, and he had javelins, sheaf of javelins, and he threw those into the creature. And while he hit it, he didn't do as much damage as the group ended up doing together. So, while they're powerful, apparently some of them aren't on the same level. Now, obviously, Thor is extraordinarily powerful. But, yeah, they made contact with the Hunter. He invited them to come back. And when they got back, they saw the portal. Now, they had kind of seen the portal a little bit before, but now that they were there in the flesh, they could see through the portal. And they could see an icy plain, and at the back of it, this large castle made out of iron and ice. And they got up close enough to the Aesir, and Odin's like, "Oh, you have come and earned a place at our side. You will fight. You can fight alongside of us, along with the Ironheart, as Ragnarok approaches. This is just a foretaste of the battle. We're trying to thin their numbers down before the actual Ragnarok." And they talked to them a bit. They, were curious about, well, where's the Jormungandr serpent? And he's like, well, he's not awoken yet. His arrival presages the beginning of Ragnarok, but he's not here yet. And they're like, oh, well, we want to fight at your side on this. And they're like, well, you can fight at our side. It won't help. The battle is already determined. We know our fates. I know that I am destined to be devoured by the great wolf Fenrir, who will be killed by my son Thor. Thor himself will slay the Jormungandr serpent, but die from its venom. And they're like, oh, that sucks. That's really kind of sad. So yeah, all in all, it's kind of an awkward position to be in. But the group is trying to figure out how to shut down that portal, because again, they are tasked with trying to free these Aesir up and hopefully be able to talk with them, negotiate with them, and find out what's going on. What is this Ragnarok coming up, and why are these other really powerful gifted suddenly appearing? And to that end, they're kind of making plans. Do they go through the portal and try to shut down that castle? If they do that, that might actually stop the giants' attack, and then they might be able to stop the portal, and that would free up the Aesir. Wouldn't that be great? They hadn't really thought of any concrete way of shutting down the portal from this side, so maybe shutting it down at its source. They did find out that the source of the portal, the person powering the portal, is Hel, Loki's daughter and ruler of the underworld. So, pretty big, pretty bad. If you saw the whole what was it, Thor, was it Ragnarok? Yeah, you kind of saw Hel a little bit. Yeah, she's bad news. So the group has to figure out, where are we going to go? How are we going to be able to be effective in this whole thing? And can we tip the balance one way or the other? Right now, the Aesir look like they are exhausted. They're getting tired from the fight. It's only a matter of time before somebody slips and gets seriously hurt against one of these massive giants. And how long can they possibly fight for? Can they fight for more days and keep fighting? But the thing is, coming from the other side of that portal, they can see an army of giants coming. Not just waves of a few at a time, stragglers, beasts. No, this is 7,000 frost giant warriors all trying to press to go through the portal together. It's a very intimidating sight. Now, hopefully the group can come up with something. Got a little time yet to think it out, and if they can accomplish that, well, they may have some new friends, certainly. So, we'll see how it all goes, and hopefully you'll join us for that. Until then, true believers, stay tuned for the next State of the Dungeon address for more mighty protectors. Until then, farewell.